Hey, party people, welcome back to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. This week, I am talking with Rob Wilson in CrossFit Virginia Beach. I had the distinct pleasure of sitting in on an Art of Breath seminar this past weekend. And one thing I really enjoyed about Rob and the whole Art of Breath seminar, actually, is that, to overuse a common phrase, they are hard on principles and soft on methods. One thing I think that is not up for debate is that facts do change, especially as it relates to the human condition and the way that we adapt to our environment and to the different stimulus that we try to put on ourselves. And so, yes, the facts change, but what I really enjoy about Rob Wilson is that he's open to that change. And so, what I think we can all take away from this episode is his mindset and the way that he approaches coaching and his philosophy around learning. Is all really cool. This is one of the few episodes that I want to go back through and actually take notes on. So I had a great time recording this one in CrossFit Virginia Beach, and I'll talk to you guys later. Hope you enjoy this one as well. Without further ado, Rob Wilson.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right, thanks for tuning in to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Blue Aviv in San Diego, California. Today, I'm in Virginia Beach with the owner of CrossFit Virginia Beach, also one of the founder of the Art of Breath, Power, Speed, Endurance. Where do you
Art of Breath.
Okay.
Yeah.
Art of Breath. Rob Wilson, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So, the breathing protocol stuff, people that have been listening to this podcast for a while, they heard my talk with Brian McKenzie. They've heard a little bit of what I talked about with Primal Strength Doc a couple episodes ago. The breathing thing is becoming more prevalent in the human performance world. What was it that got you, started down that path in the first place?
Hindsight being what it is.
Yeah.
I would say it's been in some way a part of my consciousness for quite a long time, even when I wasn't formally aware of it. So, I grew up studying martial arts, and looking at the Eastern traditions that surround the martial arts. Japanese warrior traditions have been using meditative and breath practices forever, even though I didn't necessarily have formal instruction. At that time, I was aware of it. When you do something like, even something looking back, like I did Muay Thai all through my teens, and that sound that you make on contact with pads.
When you hit.
That's like, if you don't do it, they're like, hey, you got to breathe out when you're hitting. You need to make noise.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's actually a really strong physiological correlation that affects blood pressure during strong efforts. Which I won't go into the physiology behind that. But if you just Google like blood pressure and yelling during effort, there's like research studies about that. But I guess my first formal and focused introduction, I started doing a pretty strong yoga practice when I was 18 or 19. I was actually at Old Dominion University here in Norfolk, and I needed a PE credit, and I was young and single, and really my motivation for yoga class was that hot girls went there. Right? So I was like, maybe I'll meet a cool fitness girl who's hot.
Right.
And so I went, but it turned out that the instructor who I had was a really brilliant woman, Penny, and I can't remember Penny's last name, and I feel terrible, but she's an old school Iyengar teacher, and right away I was like, okay, I can meet chicks somewhere else.
Right.
I need to pay attention, like there's something to this. And I actually put away most of my other physical practices. I stopped lifting because I had lifted all through my teens, and I was like, all right, I'm not going to do any strength training. I'm just going to do, I can't give up surfing. That's not, I can't do that.
Right.
So I did, waterman related sports and different types of yoga. And then through the pranayama instruction, that was probably my first formal exposure to like a purposeful breath practice where I was creating a very specific input with the goal of a very specific outcome.
So you came for the yoga pants, stayed for the ideology.
Yes, exactly.
So
it sounds like a shirt.
Right, yeah, it does. We make shirts out of quotes all the time, so that might end up somewhere. So what, I guess, to take it a step back, for people that are listening to this, and this is funny because when I just went to the Art of Breath seminar that you and Brian McKenzie taught a couple days ago, and when I requested it off from work to go to a breathing clinic, they were like, what kind of hippy dippy shit are you into, man? Like, people don't understand. They don't. So to take it a step back, when we're talking about breathing practice, everybody breathes everywhere they go, obviously.
Yeah.
One of the strong components to a life, or any life form,
right? Sure, yeah.
So
gotta do it.
So then, what are we talking about when we're talking about breathing practice?
So we're talking about breath practice. You know, you're talking about directing your breath for the specific purpose of directing your physiology, right? So one of the goals that we had when we started working on this Art of Breath platform, it's not like using breath to manipulate psychology and physiology is new, right? So, you know, if you look at strength training, people have been using things like the Valsalva maneuver to create pressure and stability for a very long time. That's not a new thing.
Right.
The yoga community, they've been using it to manipulate both psychology and physiology for thousands of years.
Right.
Same thing in Buddhist traditions. But the problem is all these concepts are very disparate, and they're sort of hidden inside these silos of individual cultures. And the lexicons that those cultures use don't necessarily speak to a broad set of communities, right? And so what we wanted to do was create a universal language that spoke to concepts and principles rather than philosophical constructs,
right?
So that we could take this super valuable information, manipulating your physiology with the most fundamental aspect of life, breathing,
right,
and insert that information into any community and make it valuable for any person, right? Because like you said, we're all breathing all the time anyway.
Right.
So it's the only tool that we have that is universally accessible. The only person who is on life support that it's not valuable for.
Right.
If you don't have conscious control over your breath mechanism anymore, it's probably the least of your problems, enhancing your performance with breathing anyway, right? So that's the idea behind it. And I would even say, you know, furthermore, evolving, and that's why we called it the art of breath, right? So if you create a method or a system, then you can become beholden to that. But art is about expression, right? So we reserve the right to change our minds as we learn. And then what can happen is as we evolve, we can help people who we're sharing with or teaching evolve too. Like, we're not afraid to say we didn't have this quite right. Right. We're going to change the terminology around this so that it makes more sense, so that it's better, it's more applicable.
How long have you been in strength and how long have you been in strength and conditioning?
About 15 years. Okay. So, I mean, I grew up really being taught and teaching. Right. My mom earned a pro card in bodybuilding when I was 15. Yeah. So all growing up, I was around professional strength coaches. Yeah. I had very good martial arts instructors. So that whole time I didn't really know, but it was sort of leading me to this culmination of events. I'm a manual therapist by trade. Okay. Right? So your mic's sitting on a massage therapy table right now. Right. So my actual trade is manual therapy, and I've been doing that about 16 years. Okay. But having the strong movement background that I had, what I realized really early on in my career was that most of the orthopedic problems that I had, or that people had who were coming to see me, were a result of either lack of movement or poor movement patterns. Right. And so immediately I started giving people homework, which is something I'm like notorious for now. Like, people come to see me and they're like, look, if you go see Rob,
he's going to make you do something.
He's going to make you do stuff. Like,
well, it creates buy-in, I'm sure.
Of course. And here's the other thing is, like, it's a force multiplier. So even if you're the best therapist in the world, if you have a problem and you come see me once a week forever, there's 168 hours in a week. That's 167 hours you have left to screw up. Right. Whatever we did. Right. So you have to have an understanding of what the problem is. That's a good point. What's your behavior that's generating that problem? Because whether you're conscious of it or not, it does always go back to behavior that generates the problem, whether it's an athletic behavior or whatever. Right.
Pattern, whatever.
Yeah, and then if you're not aware of it, you can't change it. So it's either going to create the same problem but more severely, or it'll create a new compensatory problem unless you understand the process of how problems like this originate and then what you can do about it. So really, I've always been more of an educator, and then I formalized it probably in 2006 or 7. You know, my wife Tommy opened the gym in 2006 in her garage, and then I was on board not very long after that. And I'd already been messing with like some kettlebell work and looking at. I was really inspired by Pavel Satsulin's work really early. You know, Enter the Kettlebell and Naked Warrior and all that stuff.
Yep.
Still sitting on my shelf right now.
Nice.
It's an all-time classic,
yeah,
right?
It is. Yeah.
And just understanding mechanics and movement. And then when CrossFit came out, and I remember reading Fitness in 100 Words or Less.
Yeah, the Greg Glassman quote.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's a really powerful statement.
Still, I just reposted it a couple days ago. I was like, this is still nails it.
And do I think CrossFit's perfect? It's not.
Right.
People made it.
Right.
Of course, it's not perfect, right?
Sure.
But it can evolve.
Yep.
And my thinking has evolved since that time, as it should.
Yep.
But the fact that it had such a broad range of movement patterns available, and it addressed so many different physical requirements through one program was really attractive to me, and it gave me metrics for how I could measure whether or not someone moved well. And then later on that evolved into my relationship with Dr. Kelly Starrett of MobilityWOD. You know, I was on the original MobilityWOD staff as well.
Oh, wow.
So, and I've had a good relationship with Kelly for a long time. So he's definitely evolved my thinking and like pointed me in a lot of directions around that stuff. And,
yeah.
You know, and really that's how I know Brian.
Right.
Is through Kelly.
Yeah. So you've been at it a while, and of course Brian McKenzie's been kind of prolific in the sport of CrossFit, in and out of it. What I'm getting at is the fact that you guys you're not dogmatic about the way that you're teaching, the way that you're going about you're more like tinkering and exploring new ideas. Well, actually they're not new ideas, but you're kind of bringing them to the forefront. Whereas I think you can tell somebody hasn't done something for a very long time because they become very dogmatic. All of a sudden, once they learn something, everybody else is an idiot because they're not doing it that way. Like you see that a lot in CrossFit, to be honest with you, and in a lot of sports.
Yeah, and I think it's part of that can be just a natural human tendency to become protective of something that you have created.
Yeah.
And take ownership over it. But when it gets extreme, it can be harmful, not only to the people you're trying to serve, but to yourself, right? Because really then it becomes this sort of cycle of ego gratification.
Yeah, right.
Where it's like, well, I made this and it's the best, and I made this and it's the best, I made this and it's the best, instead of really the world is very big.
Yeah.
And the truth is, like before we sort of went live, we were talking about Doc Andy Galpin, who you had on recently.
Yeah.
And turns out we don't know very much about muscle physiology at all. So
right.
Most of what we know about how we should train is based on research that's very poor. So it turns out we really don't know very much at all, and that's because we haven't had very good instruments of measurement until just very recently. And I would bet in 100 years, if we don't kill ourselves,
hit the delete button on society,
right, that our measurement tools will be even more sophisticated. They'll be even better than they are now, and we'll look back on this time and go, God, we were stupid.
Right.
Yeah. So to think that, any of us has this crystallization of ultimate wisdom,
right,
is foolish at best.
Right.
And if your primary MO is not evolution, I think you're missing the boat. Again, not only for populations that you're trying to serve, but for your own evolution, your own understanding of yourself. And like I said, I come from a martial arts background, and the school that I went to was really heavy in Jeet Kune Do concepts, which is Bruce Lee's philosophy, right? And so the basic idea is absorbs what is useful, research your own experience, add what is specifically your own. Right. So you should always be looking to outside of not only your own sort of system of thinking, but your own sort of job or your own career or your own sphere of people, So people ask me like, well, what's the last strength and conditioning book that you read that you really like? And I'm like, I haven't read a strength and conditioning book in years. I'm thinking about other pieces of the puzzle. I'm really interested in things like learning, and how do we learn, and how does pedagogy work? How can I take information that I have and transmit it to individuals or groups of people effectively, right? but strength and conditioning research comes out so fast. I just sort of read articles as they come out. But
stay
as far
aware
as
of
like
stuff.
another book, it's like how many different ways can I learn how to do bench press or strict press? Like once you understand biomechanical principles, you can extrapolate your own ideas around it, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. And once you understand, like, you know, the linear periodization that's at the bottom of every single program, it's like you can only rewrite that so many different times.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think in psychology that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, when you like cling on to something and make it your own and think. And what's interesting is as time goes on, you see these thought leaders like you're mentioning, they kind of have to dig their heels in to protect what they've done, which is so what I think is cool about what you're talking about in your sphere of influence. You, Dr. Andy Galpin, Brian McKenzie, you're all very open. And it was stark when he came on Joe Rogan's podcast, because he was very like, Joe Rogan's like, well, what about ketosis, right? And he's like, well, I don't know, it could work, you know, but it doesn't have to. Like, it's a tool, and that was just
anytime you're dealing with human beings, there's a lot of variables.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you're talking about human performance and athletic performance, or like we were talking about tactical communities.
Yeah.
Even let's say like ketosis is really good, right? We'll just say, just for easy sake of discussion, ketosis is awesome and it does a lot of great things.
Yep.
Right. If you introduce it to somebody who doesn't trust it, their likelihood of adhering to a program that they don't trust is very minimal anyway.
True.
So they wouldn't even get the effects. So, you know, a lot of coaching and teaching and dealing with human performance is the human part. And I think people tend to forget the human part of human performance.
For sure.
And
definitely nowadays.
They really get attached to whatever their ideology or system of thinking is, and not realizing that there are some fundamentals and themes that are similar. You know, there are some archetypes that we have to deal with, but a lot of times when it comes to application, we have to think about who is this person, who is the individual. You know, is strength training good? Yeah, but how much? For who? What's the goal?
Yeah, right.
You know, if you're trying
what's
to
the context behind all of it?
Exactly, what's the context? If you're an Olympic lifter, it's really important because you're in a strength sport, you're in a power sport.
Right.
But like, for me, I mostly just don't want to get hurt when I do jiu-jitsu, and I want to be able to go to surf pain-free and body surf, and also be able to take on a physical task or challenge that I didn't know was coming, and not be like so beat up, you know. And I spent a couple of years kind of doing a deep dive into Olympic lifting. I just wanted to understand it better, and I was getting some really good coaching, but I was tired a lot because it's such a hammer on your central nervous system. And I knew what I was getting into, and I made a conscious choice to go down that road. But it's not, for me, something that I would want to do at that level, at that much training volume forever, because there's other things I like to do.
Right.
And that's sort of, I had to come to terms with that. Like, I can't do this and learn jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And surf when it's good, you know. And I didn't surf much in 2016 at all, which is really weird for me because I've been surfing since I was 11, and I'm 37.
Okay.
And this year, I had a more well-rounded sort of GPP training program, and you know that we had a really good swells here all through September.
Yep.
And I surfed like every day, a couple times, twice a day.
Nice.
And was still able to do my strength and conditioning and go to jiu-jitsu. So I was like, this is the kind of lifestyle that I want.
Right.
Some people decide, hey, I want to go down the rabbit hole of lifting and compete and go for it, and that's great. It's just what's the individual want? Sure.
And it takes a little bit of maturity to realize, like, if that's not your goal, then you don't need to go. You might not necessarily need to go 100% in that endeavor. Exactly. A lot of people start CrossFit, you know, and I've talked about this a lot on the show, but they're like, oh, I'm going to the games for sure. Like, I'm an athletic person. The barrier to entry seems low. And then they get so, I mean, I was that person. I got wrapped up into 6 hours a day in the gym. And then I realized, like, I'm kind of fucking miserable right now. Like, I don't know what I'm doing this for, actually.
Fun,
Right.
Yeah, and to me, you know, I think it's almost like thinking if you play Pop Warner football or like high school football, you're going to go to this. That guarantees you a spot in the Super Bowl.
Right.
And I don't think
it is like that, but you don't realize it's like that.
People realize until they like maybe if you have like a session around a games athlete and
Yeah.
you realize that like, oh, they're the 1%. Like we are there now. If it was 2006 or 7, you could like train once a day or so.
Oh yeah.
And go to games and like, hey, I'm here with Spieler. Right. Now, like that your average CrossFitter doesn't. Even like your average really good. Like for most people, like the best guy in their gym sucks compared to Rich Froning.
Right.
Like bad.
Right.
The amount of volume he can handle, the strength, the base of strength, the base, like how many years he's put into developing.
Yeah.
The workhorse.
Right.
That's there.
Yeah,
like,
the
oh
engine.
man, you know, it's funny here because I'm still really involved with the everyday workings of the gym here.
Right.
And so I'm here a lot when people come by to talk to us, and they're like, yeah, I saw CrossFit. You know, I was watching on the
ESPN
game thing on ESPN. He's like, what do you think my chances are of going to the games? And I'm like, not too far from 0.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. Not at 1.
Yeah. They're not real good.
Right.
Have you exercised before? Well, a little bit. You know, I'm 30, but I played high school football for a year.
Right.
I'm like, okay. All right. Can you squat all the way down?
Yeah.
Like that's the first. Like, oh no. I'm like, well, you get no rep.
For sure.
Right
out of the gate.
You get no rep here.
Right.
Like, don't even worry about competing yet.
I think as it grows, people are starting to like realize like, holy shit, that's a lot further off.
Yeah, and just it gives you permission just to enjoy it again as being like a fitness community. And prior to the games, that's all it was. There was a group of people who would get together in a social atmosphere, create a culture of health and movement, and bring back the idea of, hey, if I want to achieve something, I have to work really hard, right? And like the reality of, if I want a really high level of fitness, then that accompanying that is really hard work. And sort of removing people from the myth of, oh, well, if I get on an elliptical for half an hour, that's going to give me everything that I want out of my physical being, and it's not. Right.
It's going to be pointed work.
Yeah, you have to work. You just have to work hard.
Yeah.
And that is something that you can learn coming to CrossFit. And it's so highly skill dependent. Or at least in my view, it is. It should be a skill-based practice, and you have to deal with a lot of learning problems, frustration, you know, not getting it, right? Failure. To deal with failure, it makes people deal with failure on a level that most of us haven't seen since we were kids. Right? Like learn how to ride your bike and falling and being outside and getting your knees scraped. That kind of frustration is really important, and it's interesting. It kind of brings us full circle back around. You know, so with the Art of Breath this weekend afterwards, you know, Dr. Andrew Huberman from Stanford was here, and he was talking about brain plasticity, and what they find is one of the keys is the point of frustration. Right. It's that struggle with solving this problem.
That forces like a new pathway neurologically.
It forces your brain to shift.
Right.
And to remold itself so that it can understand how to solve this problem more easily. And that's one of the highest value things I think that CrossFit or whatever movement practice you take on, if it has complex movement patterns that are difficult to learn, then it has a value for brain health that I think if you don't emphasize this in your training environment, that you're missing out on. There's this whole component of brain health and mental acuity that people who don't prioritize skill, they miss. They just sort of use it as like a drug to forget the workday. Right. And they miss out on this enormous benefit.
The actual skill of learning a new skill.
Exactly.
Yeah, the skill of learning.
There's that part, that sort of philosophical construct of like, hey, I'm getting skilled at learning. Yeah. But then there's also like the literal health component where it's like more and more diseases that people are getting.
Parkinson's.
Are based on having neurological problems. Right. And so if by exposing yourself to environments continually that force you to be plastic, you know, in your brain activity. Yeah. You know, it's that old Japanese, you know, that Shoshin, that beginner's mind, right? That white belt mind. Like, I'm not afraid to fail. I'm not afraid to learn. Yeah. Right? And just constantly putting yourself in environments where you'll be forced to fail.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's what I thought was cool about Dr. Huberman's talk is like he was so intrigued with the idea that we're still learning so much about our own brain. A lot of the country, a lot of technology is shifting towards like AI and we're going to integrate our biology with technology and all these things.
Yeah.
And he's like, hold on, we know nothing about, like, in the grand scheme of things, how we even are evolving. And we're at a point right now, I think, in history where we get to choose our next evolution. And it's super cool that there's still people out there that are, like, really deep into the human aspect, because it's easy to forget about that.
Yeah, to me, adding AI or even, like a prosthetic or even an equipment enhancement to a physical structure we don't fully understand and know how to operate is akin to, like, putting nitrous in a 16-year-old's car. Like they don't really know how to drive yet.
Yeah.
But let me supercharge this thing that I can barely fucking steer,
right.
and I don't really know how it works.
Right.
Right. So, to me, and as far as just energy, when we're just talking about the allocation of resources, to me it seems far more fruitful to allocate resources towards discovering what the existing physiology, the existing technology in the system is, and optimizing that first, and then add on to it. It'd be like, hey, we develop night vision, but we don't understand how eyes work.
Right.
Right? You have to understand how eyes work first.
Right.
And then you can add an equipment layer to that that helps you optimize how your field of vision works.
Yeah.
But if we don't understand how the brain works, or even something like muscle physiology, then how can we give advice about nutrition, or how do we know how performance enhancing drugs are going to affect people?
Right.
Things like that. You know? So, and on even a more basic level, here with our athletes, even something as simple as like wearing lifting shoes or a belt. That's that same sort of philosophical thread. It's like, well, do you know how to stabilize your spine, and do you understand how your feet, knees, and hips work?
Yeah.
And can you demonstrate that, under load while you're stressed?
Right.
And if you can, and then you get to a place where, okay, now I'm getting a little bit stronger, I'm a little bit more advanced, and I'm putting, higher stresses on the system, then add something that helps you,
Sure.
But, it's like in the tactical community, I'm like, you don't take somebody who doesn't know how to shoot and you don't give them red dot right away, right? You have to
teach them how to sight in iron sights.
You have to learn the mechanics of the weapon first.
Yeah.
And then you can go, and we have this cool thing that goes on here that enhances all these other things you already know how to do. And then you're like, whoa.
Right.
But if you don't know the basics of marksmanship, it's a ridiculous addition. That's what makes like the tactical website so funny.
Yeah.
Right.
Because all these
if you're somebody who has firearms
ISIS
training,
hunters out there are fucking perusing.
If you have any firearms training, and you like watch somebody really shittily manipulate a weapon, and they have all this kit buried, their weapon is buried under all this bullshit.
Right.
You're like, wow, you can't even change a mag reg.
Yeah. Right.
Then it's silly. But by the same token, you see, people on the gym floor, they get suited up like fucking Iron Man.
Right.
Like...
if you dump out your bag, it's just like wraps and,
you don't know how to squat.
Right.
Like, learn how to squat.
Right.
And then if you decide, like, I want
to use the aid.
I want to enhance, like, oh, shit, I'm a more advanced athlete. I'm starting to clean and jerk, 300 pounds. And I'm being exposed to like 90% of this weight on a regular basis. And I don't want my wrists to hurt.
Right.
Wrap your wrists up.
Right. Sure.
But first, learn what the front rack is supposed to look like.
Right.
And then that.
Which that brings us full circle because breathing is obviously the most fundamental basic there is in all of movement. I'm intrigued by this idea that a lot of what seems to be trending now is getting pulled from older, like 1,000-year-older philosophies. Mindfulness is trending right now. If you look at fasting is a thing right now, right? Like fasting was the Stoics were fasting, right? So, and they wrote about it in length. And so how much of what you're doing as you're exploring this new breath work is taking from what has been in history, and how much of it is kind of exploring maybe your own protocols in the next frontier?
I would say, once once you spend some time doing a deep dive of something, I don't know that you can segregate what you've learned from what you're doing in the present, even if you're not aware of it. So there's some things that I learned from yoga where when I'm exploring my breath practice, I might not be thinking like, hey, I'm doing yoga.
Mm-hmm.
But, ultimately, whether it's yogis or stoics or whoever, we're discovering these practices, these sort of ascetic practices,
Mm-hmm.
Their original goal wasn't to create a protocol, right? These were individuals or groups of individuals who were trying to improve the state of the human being, right? They were trying to understand the human condition better and then create some sort of organized pathway to help, their fellow human beings deal with the inevitable suffering of life better.
Yeah.
And well so put. I think when you start exploring these practices, they end up running parallel, because even though we're individuals, there are some things that are just universal to human experience, right? So the exact breath protocol you might need to get a specific result might be different than the specific one I need, but the reality is we both have to breathe, mm-hmm. right? And so if you take somebody from 5,000 years ago, the Stoics, and they have to breathe, I have to breathe.
Right.
They don't have to drive in a car, and maybe their life wasn't as busy, but the basic set of problems they were dealing with, and the emotions they were dealing with were very similar to how I'm feeling.
Sure.
Right. From day to day.
Yeah, if you read like a lot of like the Marcus Aurelius stuff, like you can apply that to right now. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
And that's the whole idea, right? Is something that's universal. If something is universal, it either applies to everything or it does not, right? So if it doesn't apply to everything, then it's not universal.
Right, of course.
Right? So
by definition,
it does not apply to everything, right? And so that's what we're interested in, these art of breath. And for us, some of the things we look at are ancient. There are some, so I'll give you a really cool example
mm-hmm.
Of something that happened with Brian and I. So we had looked at some apnea protocols in freediving communities, right? And so apnea basically means in the center of a breath cycle, there's a prolonged pause.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there are a lot of different ratios that people use for lots of different reasons, but the idea is to increase your CO2 tolerance so that when people are freediving and carbon dioxide builds up, mm-hmm. they can stay under longer, right? That's sort of the long and short of it.
Right.
Well, when people were doing their apnea tables, what they found out was they would just bliss the fuck out, right? And like go to these crazy places mentally. Mm-hmm. And one of the most common apnea ratios is a 1-4-2, and that's inhale, hold, exhale ratio.
Okay.
Right? So what was really cool, and we've known this for a while, this isn't any kind of big secret, right?
Right.
But this is a couple of years ago, Brian got a book for Christmas about, it was like Kundalini breath practices or something.
Yep.
And I get a text from him, and he's like, look at this shit. He circles it in the picture. When trying to raise the Kundalini for focusing the mind, use a 1-4-2 ratio. Mm. So they discovered this physiology through trial and error thousands of years ago. Damn. They weren't using it to dive yet. Right. That we know. We haven't found any records of that, right?
Right.
But what happened was they played with their physiology until they got to this place where they could get what they wanted out of it, right?
Yeah.
And then people in another community played with their physiology until they got to this place, and then it happened that they matched. Mm. And this has happened to us several times throughout the creation of this course. And there's other things, in those communities that are parallel, like in freediving, they'll call them locks, right? Like pelvic lock, diaphragm lock, throat lock. Okay. In yoga, they're called bandhas, Uddiyana bandha, Jalandhara bandha, right? So these bandhas are basically, they use the term, they term it like it's an energy block, like they're purposefully blocking where energy can move.
Okay.
For whatever that's worth. And to me, that doesn't mean that we disregard their lexicon entirely. What we do have to know is that they didn't have, their culture didn't use, it was a romantic culture built around stories, mm-hmm. right? And so what they're trying to get across is a concept. We have a scientific culture that uses scientific terminology, and science is sort of our pinnacle of our culture.
Yeah,
right?
It's like the new religion.
It's the new religion, right? So we relate to science, but the reality of the experience and the result is ultimately the same, right? And so that's why, you know, as we sort of are discovering and going through our process of working through these things, I'm not attached to the freediving community's explanation any more than I'm attached to the yoga community's explanation.
Right.
The only thing I'm ultimately concerned with is the experience that the user gets, right? So there's times when we would use something like a superventilation protocol, which is a purposefully faster breathing rhythm.
Yep.
Something that's closer akin to WIM, right? Which, and most people don't realize, WIM got a lot of influence from Tumo, which is a really ancient Tibetan breath practice, right? And he changed it. And sometimes it's closer to like a Kapalabhati, which is like a really fast nasal breathing pattern, right? Which one's better? I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, a mentor of mine always had this saying, you know, there's no new horses, only new riders.
Right.
Right. And so if you know that, if that's at the heart of, you know, whatever construct you're trying to be creative within, you just realize that you're sort of sprinkling your own flavor on an old dish. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's the thing, is like, it's not new.
Yeah.
It's just the way that I'm teaching it, explaining it, sharing it, developing it is new.
Well, right, because if you were to take the group, let's say the group of 40 or 50 people that were at the clinic on Saturday, and you were to say like, hey, we're going to go over Tumo, right? And that's the way you were to phrase it. We're going to like learn this Tibetan philosophy. I guarantee that they would not be as open to it as if you frame it in the way that you do, which is like, look, we're looking for new advances in our human performance, right? Yeah. And so CrossFitters and cyclists, people like myself, endurance runners, were like, okay, that's something I could use, right?
For sure, yeah. And so it's like, how can I tailor this to my goal? Right. And so what we don't want is for communities to be excluding it just because of a name. Right. And I think that's what happens now. And you know, an example of this is, you know, so I work inside the tactical communities a lot, and when we talk about something like taking a practice like this, like one of these breath practices, and you're trying to introduce it into a community of warriors, you know, first of all, that's a closed community, right? For sure. Right. And on purpose, and rightfully so. Right. There's a reason that culture is like that. Yep. And also understanding what the job is and the mindset that accompanies that job, which is ultimately to kill people who want to destroy your culture or hurt the person next to you. Sure. I mean, that your job is to protect the culture in which you live. Yeah. That's a warrior's job. Right. So even if you don't articulate it that way, right, ultimately that's what it is. For sure. Right. And so it involves killing. Mm-hmm. So you can't have a concept like ahimsa, which is nonviolence, and have that philosophical construct around something like that that's sort of peaceful and woo-woo. Yeah. And try to introduce it into a bunch of people who train to use weapons that kill other people, right? Because it can be disruptive of the mindset required in order for them to do their job and come home safely. Yeah. And so what you have to do is alter the terminology in a way that, the terminology and application in a way that makes it useful for that group of people. Yeah. Right? So the fact that, yes, they are purposefully breathing is important, but why? Right? Well, so you can be a better you. Ultimately, in yoga, the point of doing a breathing is to have a better understanding of yourself in relationship to your physiology in the world, so you can be a better you. It's the same thing if you're a warrior, except now I'm not trying to impose a philosophical paradigm on somebody. I'm just saying, here's a way that you can use your body that will make you better at what you want. I'm not placing any judgment on that person's vocation, sport, or performance directive. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, hey, this thing does this. It's a tool in the toolbox. You know, crescent wrench isn't better than an adjustable wrench. Right. It's just which one do you need and for what. Yeah. Right. And so being sort of agnostic around the philosophical constructs is what allows us to take these art of breath educational concepts, and that's really what they are, is educational concepts, and direct them into so far an unlimited set of communities. There hasn't been a community.
Who's taken it on the most?
Has
it been CrossFit?
That's what we've presented the most, and that's probably logistically the most, and because Brian has such strong pull in that community, has a reputation there.
Yeah.
I would say generally like the movement culture, performance junkie community, endurance communities, especially because, you know, endurance junkies in particular, anything that they can do to process oxygen better and feel high as a result of taking in oxygen, like endurance junkies are all about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you heard me so what percentage of aerobic conditioning can I get with this, you know, practice or whatever?
And I mean, it's a valid concern, right? So if you're a cyclist or you're a marathoner or ultra runner, it's a totally valid question, and there's nothing wrong with asking it. Right. So when I started to get back into this work, my sort of re-entry after yoga was Wim Hof, right? And I wasn't doing it thinking like it was going to make me nicer to my wife, but that's what happened.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So not that I was like some ruthless piece of shit or anything. Right. But what it ultimately does is it just makes you more aware. You just become a more aware human being.
You do.
And you can't segment your awareness of your reaction and physiology when you're running from when you're talking to your loved ones.
Very true.
You just start to notice all of it. Right. Like, wait, why do I feel right now a similar way to like how I feel right before I'm going to work out really hard, but I'm just having a disagreement with my wife. Right. So that's not the appropriate time to have sort of a fight or flight reaction. But that's what happens sometimes, right? You get that heat, you kind of get revved up, and what ends up happening is you really don't have full access to your cognitive capacities. We can say things we don't mean. You can fail to communicate well. Right? Even if nothing negative happens, you might not communicate as well as you could otherwise. And what I noticed is it would help me take a step back and kind of go, well, wait, what's the real intention behind what this person is saying? And what do I want to communicate? Instead of sort of either just trying to get through the conversation or being reactive. You know,
people out there beeping their horns as we're talking, just reacting to shit all day long. Nobody's doing anything with intention.
Exactly. And it starts to just happen sort of, sort of like intention, unintention. Like after a while, you can't go through your day either like consciously. Am I putting my backpack on? Is this really what I want? Because those are the people who end up being airy-fairy people. Who don't get jack shit done.
They don't get through to anybody.
They don't get through to anybody. They don't get anything done. They don't accomplish anything. They don't move forward and progress. Oh, well, I was just thinking, like, do I really want to do this? I'm like, when I talk to those people, I'm like, fuck, just get out of my way. I got somewhere to be. Right? But on the other hand, if you're never conscious of what's going on, it's not good either. You end up just becoming very reactive, and life sort of drags you around by the ear.
It does, because I'm that opposite, and I'm transactional. Like, say what you got to say so I can get out of here. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need new friends. Just tell me what you think I need to know, and I'll tell you if I need to know it, and then I'm going to leave. I'm really intrigued by this idea that how you do one thing is how you do all things. It's very cliche, but I've just realized how true it is.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is... I'll give him some props here, but I knew this saying before I knew him. So Kelly Starrett, one thing he refers to a lot as Musashi, right? So you know who Musashi is?
No.
Miyamoto Musashi. So he's a really famous swordsman in Japan, right, during medieval times. He had over 60 duels, some that were to the death. He won them all. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, right, which is an amazing book. But one of his very famous sayings is, let your fighting stance be your everyday stance, and your everyday stance be your fighting stance. So, in his view, the martial way was applicable to all things, and was a mindset that was applied to all activities. So, and that had to do with thoughtful intention and awareness. And not Not meaning the martial way and like I should be thinking about killing in everything I do, but I should be purposeful.
Right.
In everything I do. So
damn, so it was around before Instagram memes.
Turns out.
Wow. Okay.
Turns out.
Right.
Turns out there was a world before Instagram. People are like, Instagram's only like 3 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and you know what? In 3 years, it could totally be gone.
Yeah.
Which I probably should save some stuff because I have like the beginnings to some articles on there.
Oh, yeah.
I should probably hang on to those things.
Yeah. Well, Einstein and C.S. Lewis said everything. So don't worry about it.
I know. Wow.
So the reason I thought maybe CrossFitters would be the first to take this on is because just generally I find that it's a very open community because there's so much shit you have to learn that they, I think just by need, they're very open to a lot of different things. And what's interesting is at the beginning of CrossFit, this idea of learning to breathe fire was a concept, right? And I think I thought back to that when we were doing our thing because, like you've been mentioning, using your breath intentionally, really what we think is we got to turn the heat up in order to just build that aerobic engine, right? So you just keep going harder and you going harder, and because intensity was really the way, especially in CrossFit for a really long time, which I guess is what a lot of people had issues with. And so you think that you have to crank the intensity up in order to really dial that aerobic engine up. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is when we were learning how to pack air in there, we were doing some of the sprints on the Aerodyne. So just for people that are listening to this, that might be like on the fence of whether they want to take on some kind of breathing practice or research what you guys are doing. We did 3 30-second sprints on the Aerodyne. It took me 2.5. I thought I had a good aerobic engine. I don't. It took me 2.5 minutes to get back to baseline, which seemed like a long time.
Yeah.
Everybody else was fine, and I was like trying to get my shit together, walking around the parking lot. And then we did the pack air thing, and it was 21 seconds.
It's a big difference, right?
Right. And so I'm like, wow, I think this idea of learning to breathe fire, it's like, or just learn to breathe correctly, and then you don't have to be a slave to breathing fire, you know?
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? And I think this is where people got started to make idolaters of fire breathers,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is intensity is a metric, right? It's a benchmark. It's a measurement of fitness. It's not a builder of fitness. It's just like
Interesting.
It's just like you talk about UFC, like fight night is the measure,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't get in a fight every day to become a better fighter. Like you go to camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you take somebody like a professional UFC fighter and they like go learn from different instructors. They try things in these different bubbles. Over time they start to integrate it. They have a fight camp where they start to put it together,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have a night where they're tested,
Okay.
right? In that similar vein, we have benchmarks, right? Specifically in CrossFit,
Right.
Like Fran,
Right, the girl WODs,
yeah, the
hero
hero
WODs.
workouts,
Yep.
right? Things like that, strength numbers. I mean, if you do a 5-rep max test, you don't do a 5-rep max every day in order to build your 5-rep max. You burn out,
Right.
There's a limited supply of energy, and that same energy is used for everything you do, not just for strength and conditioning. It's not like there's a separate tank for CrossFit and then another one for work and another one for your family.
Yeah, you're using the resources you got. Once they're gone, they're
It all
gone.
draws from the same fuel tank.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So I think what people fail to realize is things like Fran or whatever those are tests, right? That's a test of how did my preparation up to this point, does it reflect?
That's an interesting mindset shift.
Since
Yeah.
the last time. Fran is not a training tool.
Yeah.
Right? That breaks you down too much. Training is about stress and rebuild, stress and rebuild, stress and rebuild. Anybody who's ever done Fran and done it like really hard,
Yeah.
it burns you.
Yeah.
And you're hurt for a while. It hurts you for a while.
Right.
Right? Like if you give it some ass,
Yeah.
it hurts you.
Yeah,
And
like
it hurts you for a long time after it's over.
Yeah.
That to me is not a builder. You can learn from it, like, oh, I tapped out mentally. I had more physically. It doesn't mean you're not learning anything from your test.
Right.
It just means that's not building you, right? But, your sort of subsequent weeks of conditioning, doing some thrusters, a couple workouts with thrusters. Oh, I've been working on my pull-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And then it culminates in that moment of benchmark testing. That is the point, right? It's just like, in that superventilation sequence that you learned on the Aerodyne, that is the time to use something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is sort of boosting the system with oxygen. That's a good thing to do on a test day or a competition day when it's time to win. But you need some stressors and some builders in order to get the training effect that you're talking about. Because ultimately, anytime that we have, and this is to me what makes human beings so interesting, is that we're the only animals on the planet who purposefully direct our own adaptation.
Right.
Everything else is just sort of gets pushed around by its environment, and then it reacts.
Yeah, it's
or
still
changes,
surviving.
Yeah, subconsciously.
Yeah.
For the most part, right? Like even super intelligent mammals like cetaceans and other primates don't manipulate themselves in relationship to their environment the way that we do. They're not creating specialized shelters.
They're starting to, but yes.
Yeah, but or migrate.
Right.
All right, in the way that we have, at least not on the level that
Not even
human
close.
beings have done. Yeah, they're not even.
There's a group of primates. This is super off topic. There's a group of primates that I just read are entering the Stone Age, though.
Yeah.
The Dark Ages. That's fucking nuts.
It's nuts, right? Planet of the Apes.
Yeah. Right.
But none of them have a podcast.
Right.
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 So it's like we're so far removed from that.
Very
like,
true.
You and I are talking to each other on this like made up cone.
Yep.
That has basically a metal string that plugs into this weird flat device.
Yeah.
That has a screen that neither one of us probably understands very well how it works.
Yeah, not really.
We just know that if we put this thing into this hole, it'll do the thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's just how it works.
Yeah, right.
It just magically, it's like magic.
Right.
I have no idea how this shit works.
No,
How
I
the
don't
phone
either.
works. I don't fucking know anything. Somebody was like, this was like a year ago, somebody was like, hey man, you know, on your iPhone, it's super important to like, the reason you have to clean the screen is because it's not actually touch, it's the electromagnetic, it's the static electricity from your finger.
What?
The glass that's picked up through the glass.
Okay.
And that's how touchscreen works. So if you have something on your finger or there's a smudge on the glass, there's too much.
That's why
there's too much of a barrier between the
So
static.
when your hands are wet.
And it can't read it.
I'm like, I'm still touching it.
Exactly. So it's not
because
like,
I'm a primate.
It's
I'm
not,
yelling
it's not
at
a button.
it.
Right?
Right. Okay.
So in any case, I guess the point I was trying to get to was, you know, we can direct our own adaptation, and that's what training is. That's me going, hey, there's a thing I want to be able to do or understand, right? And then I go, well, let me try X, Y, and Z and see if the output equals what I want. And here's my measurement for knowing I got what I want.
Right.
And I think what happens is most people get addicted to the XYZ, especially in sports performance and athletics, because the XYZ releases a bunch of chemicals from your brain that are just like most of the drugs people really like.
Right.
And they get addicted to it. And what's really interesting, and I don't know if you found this with your exposure to any CrossFit community folks, but there are a good amount of CrossFit people who have addict backgrounds.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Right?
I have an addictive personality.
Yeah, so they have an addictive personality, and then they get exposed to something that floods their brain.
Yeah.
With feel-good chemicals.
Yep.
Right away. It's real quick, right?
Sure.
It's not like a run where it's like 20 minutes into the run, I get the runner's high.
Yeah, right.
In CrossFit, you get the runner's high in like 30 seconds or a minute, right? And the reason is, and it's kind of interesting, I learned this from listening to Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Okay.
There's a chemical when you're putting your body under a lot of stress that gets released from your brain called dynorphin.
Yeah.
Which is like, ew, I don't like this. It's a discomfort chemical, right?
Yeah.
Well, to balance that back out, depending on the level that's released, then your body releases endorphin, which is the opposite of that, right? Endogenous morphine.
Yeah.
So basically, your body shoots you up full of innate heroin.
Right.
And you're like, whew, I'm so high. So that desire to suffer is because of the afterglow.
Oh God. Okay.
Right.
That's
and so
awesome.
then you ask people, why are you doing this? And what's interesting, when people ask me like, hey coach, or whatever, how do I do this goal? Then one of my first things is like, well, why do you want it? And if they don't have a reason that makes sense, a lot of times they don't even know. It's just sort of like, well, it's a thing to do. Well, so and so said I would get skinny or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging them. That's what you want. But a lot of times people don't even have an answer for me.
Right.
If I ask a why, they know what, but they don't know why.
Yeah.
And then they get to that what, and it's empty.
Yeah.
And then all they have is to replace it with another what, and another what, and another what, and never knowing why.
Yeah.
And then they spend this time, and then they get to the end of 2 years of something.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck, I just spent 2 years. And they're kind of bummed.
Yeah.
Right? And you go, well, listen, you have to have a why. why do I do this? And the people who have a strong why stay with things for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, they know why they're here. Whatever that reason is. Some people it is like, well, my dad died young and I don't want to die young.
Right.
Some people it's real simplistic. Look, I like my partner and I want to look good naked.
Right.
Right? And that's totally fine. Most people want to look good naked. It's totally cool.
Yeah.
Right? Or you know, like I have some guys who come to the gym who are like, I want to be able to protect my family.
Yeah.
Like I want to be physically capable so I can protect my family from things. Whatever that motivation is, but some people have no connection to their motivation at all, and that's why they end up performing poorly or quitting.
Right.
You know, so I got off on a
No, it's cool. Me and Mike Bledsoe talked about this in length in our episode, because it was like, even if you're chasing these things and you don't have that underlying why, even if you're successful in your endeavor, right? Let's say I got to X CrossFit Regionals or whatever that was. That's so short-lived that if you're making yourself miserable, just by definition, like 99.9% of your life is going to be fucking miserable, because the actual attainment of any one thing is such a short-lived thing.
You become depressed.
You do.
A lot of people become depressed afterwards.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, so for me, one thing I came to terms with, because I used to be kind of a like hippy dippy guy, especially when I was in my yoga phase. And
Okay,
stuff. And,
nice.
You know, I was like, sort of had like a negative view around money.
Yeah.
And success, and it turns out that innately I'm a very ambitious person. And it's not because I want stuff, but because I like to see a thing in my head become real.
Right.
Right, like that's a good feeling for me, and that's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
And I don't need, like, I'm not somebody who, I don't need a lot of material stuff. I drive a old pickup truck with there's like a wet weight vest in the back of it right now.
Right.
And I could give two shits. Like, it doesn't matter to me at all.
Right.
But I'm ambitious. Like I'm ambitious. Like I want to see what I can do.
Yeah.
Because it's me, right? And
Sure.
I think that's a much healthier place to come from than I want to see what I can do because I need to make it X money or whatever the sort of artifice is around that, you know.
Yeah.
But like, and I'll give you another really good example of this is after the games, you know, Rich Froning had this. There's a picture of him on the podium. And he's just like everybody else, like wee, and he wasn't looking stoked because his team got second.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and
yeah.
he took a lot of shit. A lot of people look at me like, "Oh, this is bad sportsmanship."
I remember
blah,
seeing
blah,
that.
blah, right?
Yeah.
And I loved his response. You know, on social media, he was like, "Listen, I'm a competitor to the bone. The team that won deserved it. I'm happy for them.
Yeah.
But I'm a competitor with every fiber of my being, and I will not apologize for being who I am."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Fucking A.
Hell yeah.
Good for you, man."
Right.
Because that's who he is.
He knew who he was, right?
He wasn't taking from them, but he was being himself. Like, I don't like to lose.
Right.
That's who I am. I compete. That's part of me.
Right.
And that's why he wins, because he does it. It's for him.
Yeah.
He competes because that's where he finds himself
Yeah.
when he competes. Not because,
Well,
like,
him and the
I gotta
Lord.
prove to my daddy I'm the best.
Right,
Or whatever, you know, that sort of
Right.
subconscious ticking time bomb is. Like,
Right.
no, this is who I am. I am a competitor, and I like to compete.
Yeah.
That's who I decided I am right now, you know? And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's why he wins so handily.
So much, right?
Yeah, so much, because it's who he is. There in his mind, there is no other option, because that's where he belongs. You know? So I really appreciated that kind of honesty. Like, no, this is who
sure.
I am. You
Yeah.
know, I'm not taking anything away from their performance. They were great and they deserved it. I don't like to lose.
Right.
You
Right.
know? I was
Yeah,
like,
that's cool.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily like that. Like, I'm more of a perspective guy.
Yeah.
You know, like I go to jiu-jitsu and I'm new back to martial arts and I'm just a white belt and I'm getting tapped all the time and I don't care because I'm really process driven.
Yeah.
Even though I'm ambitious. So like, it's a weird juxtaposition, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's one that'll make you successful in the long term, which is the difference.
Yeah, for me, like, you know, it's funny because they asked me when I went to jiu-jitsu, when I started there, I was like, well, you know, what kind of plan will work? What's the best monthly plan? And they were like, well, how long do you plan on coming? And I was like, forever.
Yeah,
Right?
this is my new thing now, man.
I wouldn't come in one day.
Right.
Because, you know, I'm going to stay here and get my black belt and, like, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I also don't care about getting tapped. Like, I'm not so competitive in the moment that it will frustrate me. But
Yeah.
some guys are like, they're going to compete.
Yeah.
And man, I can feel it when they grab me.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Well, that sounds like perspective, right? You're focused on the war, not the battle.
Yeah.
You know.
And some of that's just, I'm not 25 either anymore.
Right.
So it's like,
Sure.
what's the rush?
Yeah. Right.
I'm just rushing to being dead.
Yeah. That's true.
You know.
So speaking of more of the hippie mindset, this idea of breathing and getting a transcendent experience. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, a lot. And actually, I do not. It's funny because I was talking to Dr. Huberman and Brian about this the other day about, there's this sort of resurgence of psychedelic use, and I'm really open about stuff that I've done, and I haven't been like a big drug user or anything, but I used to smoke some weed when I was a kid, and I've given it up because it's not my mind. It's not good for me. Mm-hmm. And they were like, would you ever, have you ever been drawn to the psychedelic experience or anything like that? And I was like, no, but I think it's good for people who need it. Yeah. Because I think of it like medicine.
It's a tool, right?
I think of it like medicine, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a certain ailment that requires this medicine,
mm-hmm.
then it should be available to you, and you should be able to be educated about how to use it well. But for me, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work for me right now in my life, mm-hmm. because I have some really strong experiences very regularly, just from the breath work.
Really?
And generally, it's not induced purposefully. So sometimes it's something that just happens. If I'm in the right place, sort of emotionally, and I have some sort of things on my mind, and I have enough time, and I kind of deep dive into the breath work, it'll just come up. And I don't remember if this was at the clinic. I said this at the clinic the other day, but like sometimes it shows up like crying in front of Laird Hamilton. So it was like my hero since I was like 11 years old. Yeah. I learned about big wave surfing, and like I remember watching Riding Giants.
Yeah.
I just reading articles mm-hmm. in like Outside Magazine, interviewing Laird, and like any workout program, I'd be like, oh, what's he doing? Anyway, when I went out to do the XPT thing at his house with Brian, we were doing some really deep breath work, and I had a deep dive. And I started crying, and then I opened my eyes, and Laird's grabbed me by the shoulder. He's like, "Oh man, you went deep. It's cool." And I'm like, "Cool, I got to cry in front of Laird Hamilton."
God
That's
damn
neat.
it!
That's not going to be a story I can brag about,
Yeah.
What'd you do, man? My friends who I've surfed with as a kid, they're like, "Dude, so how'd it go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't want to be like, yeah, I cried."
Yeah. Right.
But when you do some of this breath work, you start accessing pretty deep layers of your mind, and for some people, they go there pretty quick. I don't necessarily know that, especially at first, it's a place you want to go to on purpose, right? Because you open up those doors, and if you're not ready. And that's why most of the mystic traditions have there's a guide, usually somebody who's more experienced, who's been down the road already. So, and then there's warnings usually that come with that, right? Because when you start to unload your baggage, like you have to be able to process it, or it just becomes a disruption of your psychology that just sort of sits there, and it doesn't become new behaviors.
You don't transcend with it.
You don't transcend it. There's no learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. Actually, speaking of Mike Bledsoe, he put this thing up on Twitter. This was probably a couple weeks ago, and it was like, what's your favorite way of letting go of the past? And I just responded, learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're still hanging on to something, it just means you haven't learned from it yet.
Right.
That's why it's still there. So once you really learn, that means like you've accepted responsibility. Your responsibility, your part in that. Yep. Right. You have a true perspective on whatever the event was or series of events. Yep. You understand how they affected you in total, made you better or worse, and then you make a decision to integrate the lessons into your life in a way that is through behavior and not just through, running your mouth. Yeah. And then you move on, and then that means you've learned. Just because you have gone through something doesn't mean you've learned from it. I know plenty of people who have gone through lots of horrible experiences and have no perspective as a result of those experiences. They're no better off. Just because you have a life experience doesn't mean that you're better from it. It's the perspective that you gain, right? And so if if you don't gain any perspective, whether it's a life experience or a psychedelic experience or a non-ordinary state of consciousness induced through breath work, if it doesn't create perspective, then what's the fucking point? Right? You know, there's like people, you know, you have all these sort of corporate executive types who are, you know, doing ayahuasca like once a month. And I'm like, so you're using it like Coke. Right,
it's a party
drug. It's just, it's for you to forget what it's about, and you take advantage of these people who are super poor in Peru.
Yeah.
And exploit their wisdom tradition so that you can get high.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality, because if you're not getting perspective and it's not changing behavior, and I mean, of course, that's a broad brush.
Yeah, right.
Reaction. I'm sure there are some people in the corporate world who are greatly benefiting from the use of psychedelics, and good for them.
Yeah.
But to me, there are some experiences I've had where it was made extraordinarily apparent to me that this is medicine. And that I was abusing it at the time, and to not do it, or there was going to be severe consequences for me.
Wow.
Yeah. So I decided to listen to that. And we know some people would say like, oh, well, some people go, oh, well, that's the spirit of whatever, or the Archangel Michael, or whatever name.
Yeah, whatever
or
your
some people, it's
ideology
your own subconscious.
Right.
You know, telling you like, hey, dude, you better
fucked
knock
up
this
right now.
shit off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The point was that eventually, you know, you make a decision not to go down that road.
Right. But I think as humans, we don't reflect enough, right? Like we act like we are that animal in the animal kingdom that's just getting driven by all these, you know, for us, it's not someone trying to kill us. It's the gadgets, it's the screens, it's the traffic, it's the boss, it's all these things. We don't ever really step back and reflect on, like, well, what did I learn from that? Like, maybe that's something I want to take out of my life completely going forward. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. I'm someone that is drawn to psychedelics when I'm in the military, so not up until now. But when I transition out, it's something I'm interested in. It's like a tool, and I'm super excited to kind of dive into what it might provide me. What I thought was cool is Brian McKenzie said, when you do psychedelics, though, like, you're taking a ride. Like, once you take it, like, that will go through your system, and you're on that ride regardless.
It's in your blood.
Yeah, and I felt that in high school. What's cool about the breathing thing is that when you just stop. You know, like you said, you just kind of stop. And it'll go away.
You might have, like, some, what I would call, like, residue.
Oh, yeah.
From the experience. Like, it'll hang with you, but you're not along for the physiological ride. So, you know, like, some people do ayahuasca, and they are, like, vomiting, because it's tea. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so they're puking.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when I'm doing breath, so some of the most powerful experiences I've had have been doing breath work with additional environmental stressors, like extreme heat.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that's happened, and I was like, okay, this is enough.
Yeah.
I could just get out of the sauna.
Yeah,
and
right.
You remove one of the stressors and you start to come down from it immediately, but there's a lingering of that this happened.
Yeah.
But it's not so overwhelming that you can't process it. Right?
So you do breath work in the sauna?
I do.
Nice.
I do not recommend, especially like any fast breathing techniques in the sauna. If you're not experienced with those, like really experienced, not like, oh yeah, I took a course, but like some deep time, seeing how they affect you.
Yeah.
And then also like people who have like legitimately any like blood pressure problems. It's very stressful. It's very stressful on your physiology if you're not accustomed to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like volume. Like you're basically just taking volume training of breath work and just packing it all into
right.
a
You're going to be
dense
more
experience.
advanced to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, it is super powerful. And if you want to see what like a wormhole looks like, you can
Start
definitely
going down.
figure it out by doing some certain breath algorithms under heat stress.
Okay.
Right, and I mean that's Native Americans have known. You know, that's what.
Yeah.
You know, desert vision quests and stuff like that.
Right.
Not like very new. I just don't. I live in Virginia Beach, it's in the desert.
Right.
You know,
Sauna vision quest.
it's
One Life
not what I
Fitness
was looking
vision
for
quest.
when I did it either.
Yeah.
So when I had one of the experiences in particular I'm thinking of, I was actually doing alternating fast breath work in the sauna with cold exposure.
Yep.
And my intention really was for the physiological result that I would get. My intention wasn't like to manipulate my psychology. It was just, there was a secondary effect.
Right.
Yeah, it just sort of happened. You know, I got emotional. I was by myself.
Yeah.
Got emotional. Some old stuff came up. I started to get some perspective on some things. And I was like, okay, I got to pay attention to this. You know, so I stopped what I was doing so that I could sit with it and process.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, sauna's off.
Right.
I'm going to go normalize myself and then sit with it.
Yeah. What I think's cool is this is available to anybody.
Yeah, it's free.
I mean, yeah.
Once you learn how to do it.
Everybody's already breathing. Like, make it work for you.
Totally universal.
So, for people that are listening to this, how can someone start to formulate a breathing practice? But do you have resources? Like, where does someone get in on this?
Yeah, for sure. So the easiest way to start is to start, right?
Right.
To sit down once a day, and even if you don't have a formal algorithm or anything available, just to pay attention to it. That was probably the simplest way that I've used. Is just to sit in a quiet place and direct your attention towards it, and just feel what's going on. And I mean, people don't really think about it, but it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
there's basically like a balloon inside of your trunk that sucks in an invisible thing that you can't see or touch really unless there's wind.
Yeah.
It goes from inside that to your blood and becomes energy so that you can move around and think.
That is wild.
It's fucking trippy, right? Like,
Right.
That's weird.
Yeah.
And
crazy.
it's pretty miraculous because it can go really wrong. And if you know anybody who has a respiratory problem,
Right.
it really fucks their life up.
Yep.
Even something simple like asthma can really hurt people.
Yeah.
You know? So just bring some awareness to breath. If you want to get more specific,
Yeah.
Power Speed Endurance we have a breath program
Okay.
online, so you can go to PSC and look up our breath training program. You can come to Art of Breath, obviously, right?
The seminar.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think we're about done for 17. I think there might be one in Hawaii that Brian will be doing while he's out there, but the next stop that I'm 100% on is Vegas. So we're going to start the year
Okay.
in Vegas, and then our 18's pretty booked, but you can come to Art of Breath. One thing that's really cool on powerspeedendurance.com, we have a breath test calculator.
Yeah.
Where you do the CO2 tolerance test like we did at the seminar Saturday.
Yep.
And it'll give you specific cadences and rhythms, a cadence and an apnea training, specifically based on your test. And what you can do is just start out with, 5 or 10 of each type each morning.
Yeah.
And it's something that's a real simple way to start. In the next month or so, we'll have like an introduction to breath practice, like a fundamentals course, basically.
Yeah.
That would be like a one-time thing that's going to sort of marry up to the concepts that we go over in the Art of Breath. And I want to say it has 6 or 8 phases.
Okay.
So if you do it over like a phase a week, you can take a month and a half or 2 months to go through, and it's pretty simple. There's an AM, a training, and a PM protocol every day.
That's cool.
Yeah, it kind of keeps it manageable.
Yeah.
Right. But we did it in phases basically, so that if somebody doing it felt like, well, I didn't really get the understanding that I wanted out of phase 3, then you can repeat it. There's no pressure like, oh, I have to go to week 4. Like week 4, people go, well, it's right. There's a numerical climb.
Yeah.
But when it's a phase, you can go, phase 3 for me was actually 2 weeks. I repeated it because I wanted to get it better. There's no like subconscious pressure
I gotcha.
of moving on.
Okay.
But when you attach like chronological significance, then people skip.
So after I spoke with Brian McKenzie and I had spoken with James Newberry, or Caleb Banfield actually, who was dating J.S. Newberry. He's training him. They're doing a bunch of breath protocol. Kind of came to the forefront this year because a lot of games athletes were under Brian McKenzie's kind of tutelage with the breathing stuff. Easy, simple thing that I started doing is I started walking uphill on a treadmill, nasal breathing only.
Nasal breathing, all good things come from nasal breathing.
Yeah, right. So I was just like learning to shut my mouth, improve my posture, whatever. Tahoe 200 this year, 205-mile endurance run through the mountains of Lake Tahoe. I wasn't ready for the elevation because I live in Virginia Beach and all we have is Mount Trashmore. So I have zero elevation training.
Yeah.
At 80 to 90 miles, I got high altitude pulmonary edema. So my lungs filled up with fluid. I was no longer able to breathe. And, as an ultra runner.
You had AMS before that and ignored it, huh?
Yeah, for sure. As an ultra runner, though, you're never out of breath. That's not something you ever have to deal with because you're in like level 2 cardio. Like it's very low level aerobic conditioning. So being out of breath is something I've never dealt with. As my lungs filled up with fluid, I couldn't talk because I would like aspirate. I couldn't sleep because I felt like I was drowning when I laid down. At one point in the race, I was like really in a low spot because I couldn't run more than 10 feet without doubling over out of breath. I switched to nasal breathing. I was like, oh, fuck, that's something I've been practicing. I switched to nasal breathing, and I went from like mile 90 to 165 nasal breathing only until my lungs cleared up. Do you have any idea what was happening there?
Yeah, so your pulmonary system, it cleared itself out, right? Plus, so, when you're in an acute sickness like that, a lot of it has to do with, managing oxygen and carbon dioxide levels.
Yeah.
So when you close your mouth, you're not blowing off as much carbon dioxide, right? You're maintaining carbon dioxide levels, which is going to allow you to transport what oxygen is in the system to your blood more effectively, right? But if you're going to blow off CO2, and as an effect, you're not going to be able to transport oxygen on your hemoglobin and then release it into the tissue, right? So you get in this cycle of hyperventilation and hypoxia, right?
Right.
Whereas when you close your mouth, now it helps you sort of override that issue and start regulating your CO2 levels. So your body, the CO2 catches up.
It was that moment I was like, thank God I called that guy. Literally got me through a 205-mile race. So like from then on, that's when I was like, I'm signing up for the seminar. I'm in. I'm doing it. I know you got to get going here, so I'm gonna ask you the final question, which is the Lionheart kicker. Based on all the experiences you've had up until now, and it can be performance, it can be whatever whatever you want. If you were given a platform, guaranteed everybody in the world would hear the advice that you gave them. Might not all follow it. They definitely hear what you say. What would you tell people?
Follow your instincts. I don't know shit.
Intuition?
Yeah, I mean, you like to, so this is my personality type. Right?
Yeah.
To me, like I have a fundamental resistance to a question like that because I don't think any singular person should have that or does have that power.
Okay.
And this is a problem that got me out of trouble in school. Because when I look at somebody in a position of authority, I see the person who wipes their ass. Yeah. So like when I look at the commander-in-chief, I see a man. Right. I appreciate the office, but I don't, like they're not attached indispensably to me.
Still a human,
Still
just
a human,
like you
right?
are.
So like when I would see a teacher, I would go, that's a person punching a clock. Yeah. Like they're at work. My mom goes to work. Shit, I go to work. Right. They're at work. This is a lady at work. Yeah. Thank you for sharing information with me, but don't try to tell me what to do. So I don't, I have this, I'm such a resistor to things like that.
But you're like a hardcore learner.
I am a hardcore learner, but I appreciate information, and I appreciate, people caring, and I it's funny because I like the martial arts environment, so I'm very respectful to my instructor. Yeah. But I guess if I did have one piece of, if I was going to say one thing is listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right for you, it's probably not. Okay.
Yeah, we'll listen to your instinct. I don't know shit. We'll stick with that. Dude, Rob Wilson, thanks for being on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track and delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcome. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshits. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest.